This is an unrehearsed program. The views expressed are those of the guests and not necessarily those of the producer. Today's topic:
Struggle against corruption losing its steam in Passion for Truth. Award.
Welcome to another edition of Passion for Truth. Why is India's mass movement against corruption losing its steam? Why did the bubble burst? That's what we are going to talk about next with our guests. Dr. John Walrice, formerly a president and vice chancellor of Central Buganda University. Dr. Amarjeet Singh, director Voices for Freedom, also columnist for several newspapers. George Nestochek from the management consulting firm Nestochek and Associates, also former staff director with the U.S. House of Representatives. And Dr. Abul Hassan Ansari, a researcher on the historical perspectives of Indian events impacting on Muslims in India and abroad. Welcome you all. Starting with you, and Dr. Ansari, has the discontent of the Indian society not quite turned up to a boil?
Well, see, if you look into it, and this movement, Anna Hazare guy, I think he started the anti-corruption movement. I think India has been corrupt from the time of the independence. I think it was more of a ploy by the fanatic Hindus, Hindu fundamentalists, if you want to call them, to destabilize the current government, especially the Manmohan Singh. Manmohan Singh is the most honest president and prime minister we have ever found, or most honest politician in India. I think the fanatic Hindus have used various forms to destabilize the government and come to the power. First time in 1992, Babri Masjid was destroyed, and therefore Bajpai came to the power. Then this fellow Modi, he killed the 5,000 Muslims, and no question was asked. He became a hero. Actually, he was touted to be the future Prime Minister of India. Now they have run out of all these tricks. Indian people don't want violence. They want peace, progress, and prosperity. They want good food, good health, etc., etc. But these people cannot provide it. BJP or RSS, whatever name you give it, Hindu Council, or I mean, these guys have one issue. And you cannot solve the country's problem burning somebody's home, raping somebody's daughter. So the people have been fed up. So now they have come up with a new trick. Anna Hazare and his party, Congress, has been the worst corrupt party on the face of the earth. Before that, any party that has come so far, and I tell you that most of the prime ministers were corrupt, with the exception of two, perhaps three: Lal Bahadur Shastri, VP Singh, and Manmohan Singh. So it was a ploy by the fanatic Hindus to destabilize the government so they can come to the power. So it's going to lose this team.
What's your read? Was it a ploy to destabilize the government, or do you think that a global tipping point for frustration lacking in India?
I think the move to attack corruption, I think, is a natural one. In most political societies, there's always an attempt to keep the government open and honest, and so corruption is always going to be an issue. But I think in the case of India, the problem is so deep and so rooted that it'll take something of a cultural change over many years before you can really deal with it. People are used to corruption as a means of survival. They're so far removed from the centers of power that you don't really have a true democracy in India, so people don't feel empowered. And when they're not empowered, they have to survive by their own means. And that's when they resort to bribes and other ways to get local officials to bend the rules so that they can do whatever it is that they need to do. That's corruption at the grassroots, and it reflects the corruption usually higher up in government. People at the lower levels of government take their cues from the top. And if there are deals being cut at the top and people live by their own rules at the top, which they do in India, then why should locals be any different? They set up their own rules, and that's when people resort to corrupting and bribing their own officials to get by. So it's unfortunate, but India is not unique in that respect.
Is it because, Dr. Singh, everybody is benefiting from corruption, and that it is the movement is losing its steam, or do you think people in India naturally demand but then get despaired quickly?
I think I agree with Dr. Ansari when he said that he was a front man of the Hindu fundamentalist party RSS, in 1984, Indira Gandhi was clever enough to use that Hindu fanatic factor in her favor by attacking Darbar Sahib or Golden Temple. Then in Babri Mosque case, it was the Hindu fundamentalists in the front row, as that was the only time when they got political power in Delhi. Vajpayee became the Prime Minister. Now already it was getting unpopular, and there is no doubt that Manmohan Singh government, though Manmohan Singh himself may be considered honest, but his government is surrounded by many scandals, 3, 4, G20, $30 billion scandal, other scandal. So when we look at that, how Anna Hazare was brought into Delhi, how they made a deal with the major TV channels, that they brought their big vans and cameras, 24-hour broadcast all over India. And certainly Indians are suffering from this corruption, which is not since independence, from the times immemorial in that land. So I think they played a trick. They used the word Lokpal bill, that there should be a accountability kind of Lokpal by the parliament sanction. Then they fought on the technicalities of that. And by the end of the day, I think in the center there are smart politicians than the Hindu fundamentalists themselves. They played around, and eventually Anna Hazare moved from Delhi to Mumbai, where he couldn't cater to the needs of the Hindu fundamentalists. They also thought that we have earned whatever we could. They abandoned him, and people just lost interest in it. That is where the bubble burst.
Do you think the government had a hand, John, in watering down this leader's proposed anti-corruption investigating agency?
Well, first of all, there are two different things we should look at. One is corruption, and the other one is a culture of corruption. And what we've heard here is in India, we seem to have a culture of corruption rather than an isolated incident. And so, as was said, this pervades throughout the whole of the government, and then pervades throughout the whole of society. Everybody's got their hand in the cookie jar, and everybody is trying to get the best deal for them. And it happens in poor countries where our country has no clear way as how you can move ahead. So yes, I think the government has a hand in it, in trying to oppose any opposition that might change the status quo, because they're the biggest winners in this whole culture of corruption.
And I think they have a goddess of money called Lakshmi, which they worship in their homes. So,
one thing you said, that people have their hand in the cookie jar. Let me correct you here, not to insult you, but just to, everybody in India has his hand in somebody else's pocket.
Okay, but do you think the government had a hand? I mean, this is people are witnessing a greater rise in their living standards, so they really do not have much incentive in joining the crusade, because they are getting well off mostly.
But that's not necessarily the case. Corruption is something that you factor into your cost of living. If you need to get a car on time, if you need to have your phone service installed on time, if you need to upgrade some measure of government service, you factor in the fact you've got to pay somebody off. And so as the living standard goes up, you can afford the corruption more readily than if you're at the bottom rungs economically.
And I think that,
and so, you're more willing to put up with it. You're paying for efficiency with the corruption tax, so to speak. So it's pervasive, and one of the reasons is people are disenfranchised. They're not empowered in India to make changes. So it's not that they like the corruption, it's the only way they get things done. And it's from the bottom up and the top down. So until people feel like if they go and vote or change a government or a representative or an official, that there will be subsequent changes, until they feel that, they will live with the corruption. And I don't care what laws you pass in India, there'll be no execution or implementation of those laws.
And I think even the statement is not true that there is more prosperity in India. There are more people in India living below the poverty line as there were 15 years ago. There are more farmer suicides across India than they were even 10 years ago, thousands upon thousands of farmers dying. So I think this is also a myth, like the Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Two Indias building up. The one in the big cities and all, which shows prosperity, and the West or the Americans see those images. But in the real India, which is the poor India, the things are getting worse. So this can't be the argument that as in India people are getting prosperous, so they don't care that corruption is there. At times people are left with no option. The whole system, from up to the down. It's not that corruption is going from bottom to the top, but it's coming from the top to the bottom. So everything is smeared in corruption. People thought some came out of curiosity to look at how Anna Hazare is going to change. But their ringmasters were actually RSS Hindu fundamentalists. They were at their own game. And in the end, they saw the use.
If I might comment, so it doesn't look like we're all taking it out on poor India.
Yeah.
This is endemic all over the world, and it's not just in third world poverty-stricken countries. Eastern Europe, for example, which is not third world by any standards anymore, is rife with corruption. It's what was a remnant of the old communist system, the Soviet system, where bribes was the only way you could get any efficiencies out of that economy. People lived with it, and they live with it to this day, even though politically they're much more free and much more democratic. Economically, they still resort to corruption as a measure of getting some efficiencies in the distribution systems they have.
And if a head of the government is elected whose total stance is to fight corruption, he or she usually doesn't last very long. He or she disappears, or something happens, and then we go back to the status quo.
Are his George followers, Anna Hazara's followers of the crusade, justified in withdrawing their support from the leader? At least that's one theory, that he's not measuring up completely to Gandhian principles, or is that just a facade?
Well, I think he's on the horns of a dilemma, because there are two aspects to the corruption issue. One is the moral one, which is the one that we tend to deal with here in this country. Violations of laws, not living up to the standards of democracy, representation, a corrupt individual official violating laws, and so we go after him on a moral basis and prosecute him. The economic basis is gone here. We have competition, so if someone wants a bribe from us to get the TV to us faster, we say, thanks very much, but I can get it cheaper over there without a bribe. And we go. So the economic incentive is gone. In India, if you want to, with the law, attack the moral aspect of corruption, which is where this was intended, you still have the economic aspect of it, where people are paying bribes because they want to get their telephones hooked up faster, or the newer technology. So, you know, you can't hold people up to one standard morally while you practice a violation of that economically. That's where the movement in India is failing.
Let me tell you a little difference between here in America and in India. Here, I mean, you can break the law, you can take the bribe as long as you are not caught. But the day you are caught, proven, you go to jail. Tell me one Indian politician who has ever gone to jail on corruption basis. None.
Okay, but the integrity of the leader lately became a real issue, that he was not living up to the Gandhian principles of non-violence, that he encouraged his supporter to slap the politician on his face, and he endorsed that action, and he was not advocating non-violence as Gandhi had done it. And that became a circulation in the Indian newspapers. Where is that coming from?
I think neither he was a leader nor a Gandhian. They used Gandhi cap just to propagate his word, and that is how he was turned into a leader overnight. In his own village where he lives in Maharashtra, he uses flogging at a public place like the Taliban as a measure of punishment, and the cat came out of the bag, as is the proverb, that while one anti-corruption activist slapped India's federal minister, Mr. Sharad Pawar, and then Anna Hazare responded to it, just one slap, why not more? So it was very clear. I think as the cameras which gave him advantage in the beginning, they showed that what the real man is. So I think he was a front man of RSS, Hindu fundamentalist class or organization. They used him to the hilt, and eventually falsehood is falsehood, and he has disappeared now from the Indian political scene.
He did not live up to the moral standard of Gandhi.
He was never on that. If they used Gandhi's name, they knew there is respect for Gandhi. They used Gandhian cap as their insignia throughout India to say, I support Anna Hazare. But it was all a farce from the very beginning. We knew it, and I wrote columns in month of July when the big agitation was going on this Anna Hazare facade, and then even my readers, they said, oh, it don't seems to be true, the whole of India is supporting him. I said, wait for a few more months.
We will be right back then, and we will be shifting the gears here. Could it be that the Indian government is used to maintaining a tight grip on the Indian society, and the crusade against corruption violated that rule in some respect? We'll ask our panelists. Stay with us. Passion for Truth. Crusade against corruption violated the rule of maintaining tight control over its society. John?
Yes, I think if you have, as we discussed earlier, a society where you have a culture of corruption, you want to make sure that you control it as well. Otherwise, it falls apart, and it might even drift into honest dealings, which then would mean your economic base is gone. So you want to control as much power as you can over that kind of economic situation, and that's not just India, that's any other country. Look at someone mentioned earlier about the Stalinist situation, where he had the same sort of thing. It was tightly controlled in order to advance the cause of the government, and so here you have the same thing.
May I ask George, what do you make of the situation in Kashmir, where so many Indian troops are still in the region under the law that grants vast powers to the police?
It's consistent with centralized control of the state. The government in Delhi isn't going to see any region declare itself autonomous economically or politically, or even drift away from centralized control, because that could spread to other regions, other states. So Kashmir is incendiary compared to others, and if they don't quash Kashmir with police control, it has to be with police and military. That's why the state has the guns and the people don't have the guns to maintain control. So it's not surprising. That's what I make of it. It's unfortunate, and it's particularly unfortunate for the Kashmiris, because it reduces their options for expressing their unhappiness with Delhi.
How do you read, Dr. Ansari, the controversial law known as Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which gives police any powers, excessive powers, the army, to search houses, arrest people without warrants, and detain suspects indefinitely? That's what's happening to India's Paradise Valley of Kashmir.
That's very true. It's not something new that has been happening all across India. If you demand your rights, or a lot of people have gone to jail without any trial, but especially in Kashmir. There are about more than 700,000 Indian army, 300,000-400,000 border security forces, local police, and all those things. And they can go and random get anybody's home, kill anybody, arrest anybody, destroy their properties, no questions are asked. It is more of a dictatorship than the democracy. I think if somebody is a terrorist, you need to try them. If you look into the history of Kashmir, when, in 1947, Kashmir voluntarily decided to stay with India, part of the Kashmir that is India is occupying right now. And it was promised that they will have the plebiscite. This is written in the United Nations Charter. It's not something secret. Everybody knows it. But then India rescinded that. And actually one thing, Kashmir is the most beautiful part of India but ironically is most poor part of India, and that deliberately has been kept by the successive Indian governments. Finally, they got fed up and they pick up the arms. I know the military has guns, but the time comes when people will take the guns to protect their families, their rights, or their freedom. And I think we are entering into that phase. It might take another 20, 25, or 50 years, but I think eventually, if you don't listen to the people, don't give them equal rights, don't treat them with respect and dignity, that is the beginning of a revolution, and the result might take another, as I said, 25, 50 years, I don't know.
George, Dr. Ansari raises a good point, something that India is sacrificing its long-term vision. If Kashmiris were left on their own, do you think they would willingly become a part of India? And so India has a lot to gain by treating them fairly, by removing all those armed forces.
I think given the history over the last several decades, I don't see the Kashmiris voluntarily staying with India. I think a separatist movement, the fact that there are troops there and it's treated under rules of a police state underscores the fact that the Kashmiris want to leave India. I think it makes a case for the diaspora from Kashmir to remind the world that there are troops there, that Kashmiris are treated differently from other Indians. And India is really making the case for a separatist movement, quite honestly. The way they've mistreated Kashmir as a state within India is basically they're asking for an armed revolt at some point.
Same thing happened to the Sikhs. I mean, there are other minorities that when they had injustice that has gone to the point that they could not tolerate, they pick up arms and then demanded a separate Khalistan. Otherwise, the Sikhs didn't want to have Khalistan, they didn't want to have a separate country.
I think what a contrast between the two democracies. On one hand, we are looking at the news that British Prime Minister is working with the Scotland's Assembly for a referendum, that what the Scots want. On the other hand, India, which has agreed in the UN Security Council, which brought actually the Kashmir issue to the UN Security Council in 1948, and there are 17 plus UN Security Council resolutions regarding plebiscite in Kashmir. India won't honor the plebiscite thing. As far as Kashmiris go, I think when the issue was brought to UN Security Council, there were one option between them. They had to choose between India and Pakistan. And tomorrow, if UN decides to have a plebiscite in Kashmir on the line with East Timor or Kosovo or Macedonia, then certainly Kashmiris will want the third option. At this time, they won't be agreeing to join even Pakistan, whatever is the condition of Pakistan, they'll go for an independent Kashmir.
You know, there are alternative models. I mean, I can cite it in Ukraine, for example, has 25 states within the unitary state. One of those is Crimea, the state of Crimea. And Crimea has a political status of being an autonomous region in Ukraine, which means it has its own assembly, it elects its own president. They're subject to the national constitution of Ukraine, but within Crimea, they set up their own laws, they do their own policing, they don't have a separate foreign policy, but they're autonomous. They elect Tatars into the region that reflects the ethnic mixture of Crimea. So, you know, India has alternative models it could pursue.
Actually, in the Sikh issue, as well as was mentioned by Dr. Ansari, initially the Sikh leaders agreed to it, that there will be a true autonomy for Punjab, where 3-4 departments or portfolios like foreign affairs, defense and home will be with the central government, and all other portfolios will be transferred to the states. And India, instead of honoring what they agreed with the Sikh leaders, did a genocide of the Sikhs, and the same they are doing in Kashmir. And the same in Nagaland. Another problem where the majority are Christians, pacifists, but their killings are going on for the last 60 years as they are not subjecting to the rate of Hindu fundamentalist Indian state, and they are looking for true autonomy.
India is not quite silent on the issue. India is very well aware of the issue, the conflict in Kashmir, and it keeps on setting up commissions to review the controversial law. We're talking about Armed Forces Special Powers Act. And yet when the panel came for good recommendations, they came up with good recommendations and asked for it to be repealed, The Prime Minister of India ignored the recommendations completely, and now the demonstrators are throwing stones at the police, and the police are throwing stones at the demonstrators, and this battle is going on and
They're
on.
actually firing live
They're
rounds.
using live ammunition. Not
Yes.
stone.
Okay. So what do you make of this? If the panel comes up with the independent panel comes up with the recommendations to repeal the law, and the government ignores the recommendations, what else can the local government do to ameliorate?
Well, the local government can't do much. Like I said, there has to be an outside force that pushes the Indian troops out of there, because they're the ones that are perpetrating these violences against the people. Get those out of the way, put the UN troops in there to keep peace, because UN troops are basically policemen rather than military people, although they are military, but they're
700,000 armed troops.
but they're working as policemen rather than firing bullets and throwing stones at each other. They can settle the people down to a common and calm situation where they can make up their mind what it is they want to do. India lost in this battle by not accepting, what the Kashmiris were saying. But we want to be part of India, they said, and then they sent troops in there, and all kinds of trouble starts. Something is wrong here.
We'll be right back with our closing comments. Stay with us. Passion for Truth. Nailing down the loose ends, will the movement against corruption in India pick up the steam, or has it already died? And about the situation in Kashmir, will the government continue to come back in the form of bullets? Starting with you, John.
Well, I think the longer we go on with this culture of corruption, the more ingrained it becomes, and the more difficult it will be to eradicate it. As far as Kashmir is concerned, the status quo will not do. Something drastic has to happen there to bring about a change.
I think India is a corrupt country from the top, middle and bottom, and nothing will change there. As far as the Kashmir, Punjab, Nagaland or Naxalite problems are concerned, as long as India don't honors the international conventions, the right of self-determination, and let the people decide what kind of system they want, there won't be peace in these states, and in the coming decades, there may be a situation which may lead towards what happened to Soviet Union on December 8th, 1991, when it broke into 15 different countries. It may seem to be the largest democracy on the planet this day, but that won't be the situation in the coming decades.
George?
Yeah, I don't think the issue of corruption is going to disappear from the political arena in India for lifetimes. It's a viable issue for opposition parties to use against the ruling majority, and if that flips, that issue will be turned around against the new ruling majority by the new opposition. It's not going away. Whether it'll be resolved to the satisfaction of the individual Indian, not for a very, very long time, because the roots of that are very deep. As far as Kashmir, I don't see India embarking anytime soon on some kind of road to resolution. I think India is happy with an excuse to have troops stationed there to maintain control. It serves as an example to the rest of India that if anybody gets out of line, that's the future waiting for them. So I don't think they're going to let go anytime soon, and that's not a happy circumstance for Kashmiris.
First of all, as everybody said that India is a culture of corruption. I think it can be corrected, but you need not to change the culture, you need to bring the revolution. Revolutions happen, and they have changed the cultures, they have changed the corruptions. Regarding Kashmir, one of the things that you need to know the psyche of a Brahmin. I keep on hammering the word Brahmin. They understand one language, and that's a language of power. If you are weak, you request, you are going to be denied your rights. You pick up the arm, and one day you will reach your goal. And I think that is what's going to happen in Kashmir, perhaps in Nagaland and in Punjab.
And that's all the time we have. We'll bring you another edition of Passion for Truth next Saturday and Sunday. Thank you for joining us. Thank you all.